Good morning again, everyone. This is Susan from Learning Times, and it's a delight to have you join us for the second in the series of the MCN Pro Workshop series. I am Susan from Learning Times, but I am not going to be on speaking all day. I just want to welcome you and then to make sure that you're comfortable using the chat feature over on the left, which it looks like most of you are. Thank you so much. Don't worry if you think that you're seeing your posts twice. That is because this is a moderated chat and only you are seeing it twice, nobody else. You can use this area to ask questions of the speakers throughout the morning. So if you have questions or comments, put your ideas there. If you need any technical assistance, I hope you'll let me know there as well. All right. Today we're going to be hearing from Elizabeth Neely from the Art Institute of Chicago, also Stephen Hoban from the Guggenheim, and Tina Henderson, a publishing consultant. And I believe we're going to start with Elizabeth, and so I will turn this over to you, Elizabeth, and welcome you.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I just love seeing all of your names in the side here. So please keep it going with the chat, and as we go along, we'll try and keep track of that, and we'll try and answer any questions as it makes sense within as we're going, and let's just keep it lively. So as Susan mentioned, I'm Liz Neely from the Art Institute of Chicago, and I'm also on the MCN board, so I'm chairing this session for MCN Pro, and we're really happy to have you for MCN Pro. This is just our way to kind of make it easier to have professional development and in smaller bit size rather than just going to the conference. So I just want to point out that we have a couple, the next MCN Pro workshop that we have, one on social media engagement, digital asset managers, and digital media management. So these are things that you can watch out for if you like this today, or there are other things that you're trying to learn in your organization, something to keep an eye on. So again, as Susan mentioned, I just want to kind of orient us. I won't spend a lot of time on this because you all know who's on here, but we have Stephen Hoban from the Guggenheim, and he's the Associate Director of Publishing at the Guggenheim in New York, which he joined in 2001. In consultation with multiple museum departments, Stephen has overseen the Guggenheim's initiatives into digital publishing, which are pretty impressive, launching the first exhibition catalog eBook in 2011. By experimenting with an array of new publishing formats, releasing new digital publications in addition to out-of-print historical titles, Stephen's efforts have focused on helping new audiences access to the museum's rich content. So then we have Tina Henderson, who is just a wealth of information, is going to really lay the groundwork for us on what our options are. And she's a freelance designer, production artist of books, eBooks, and book apps. She's worked with art book publishers such as Henry Abrams, museums such as the Met, and design studios. She recently completed a personal book app and is currently working on multi-touch iBook with the Monticelli Press. And so in order to, I just want to give us, it's a 2.5 hours, a long time, so this kind of gives us a little bit of an orientation of how we're going to, what the journey is going to be like. We're going to first hear from Stephen and kind of get an overview by using the Guggenheim as a case study of eBooks, a museum perspective. And then before we get too deep into things, we're going to look at terms and formats. So Tina's going to give us the nuts and bolts on what we need to know. We have quite a few groups today. So we're going to, although we really want you to be able to ask questions as we go along, that we know that you groups probably have one computer. So we want to Tina will give you a little heads up when this is coming up. And this will allow you to kind of group with your group to come up with questions so that you can put things up. Oh, look at me. I already forgot one of my polls. Just wanted to get a sense for how many people are watching from your location. So that Q&A check-in will get some information from your group. It also lets us kind of make sure that we're level set on those terms. So then after that, Tina will dive into the format and really get into some technical details. And then we'll kind of, moving on from that, look at publishing and distribution from, again, returning to the Guggenheim as a case study and what's worked for them and what they've learned. And then we'll round up with some quick trends and more Q&A. So, so we've got some polls up there, and this would really help the presenters know. So we've got how many people are watching this webinar. So it looks like we still have most people, just me. And let's see, we have another poll here. That are you actively involved in establishing a digital publishing strategy? Oh, looks like a big number. Good. Well, I think today will really help with that. I think we have one other poll, too, to kind of find out which area you're coming from. We know that digital publishing comes out of a lot of different places and is very collaborative. And so we're just kind of curious where we're getting people from. Editorial, publications, strategy, digital media. And as we can see those polls come in live, it looks like we're kind of an even mix between mixed group, publications. Great. Okay. Well, I think that without further ado, we have a comment from someone saying that as far as digital strategy, we needed a category for trying to. Yes. Well, hopefully this will help. All right. Without further ado, let's go into Stephen's presentation.
Great. Thank you, Liz. Good morning, everyone. I see that there were, in those polls, there were quite a few groups of 10 or more, some big groups, which is very exciting. As Liz mentioned, I'm just going to start things off here talking about basically the background of how the Guggenheim Museum got interested in publishing digital books and our first foray into digital publishing, and just going to keep it in a very general terms at first, and then after we hear Tina, I can come back and give a few more specifics about what we've tried and what we found that works and what we found that hasn't worked. Just to give you some background, as Liz mentioned, we started publishing digital books in fall of 2011, which is less than 18 months ago, just over a year ago, but feels like a very long time. But previous to that, as a museum, we've been publishing books since 1937. So we have a pretty solid legacy of print books before we decided to dip our toe into the digital realm. And just to make sure that we are all on the same page as far as what we're talking about in terms of museum books, what we at the Guggenheim have been printing primarily are our exhibition catalogs, and that's part of our mission, that we try to print an exhibition catalog to accompany all of our major exhibitions. And these have pretty much fallen into a standard format that I think that most museums follow in their printed books, and it includes, obviously representations of the artworks in the plate section. Sometimes we'll have entries describing the artworks either in the plate section or in a separate section. We'll usually have a main introductory essay by the exhibition curator, as well as some other essays either by the curator or by other outside scholars. And then typically, depending on resources, we'll have a back matter that will include bibliography, exhibition history or exhibition histories, chronology, and other similar materials, and index if we're able to get things done on schedule, which is pretty rare. But of course, what's common to all this is that they have a defined order. It's a very traditional format, and it's very static and it's very, very regimented. some things that are obvious that I just wanted to point out to printed books that begin to become clearer when you look at digital is that the most obvious thing about print books that makes it different is that it has a set print run, meaning like you print a number of books and those are the number of copies that exist in the physical world. And once they're printed, they need to be distributed. So for most museums, that will involve selling them in the museum store. Sometimes you will be able to sell them on your museum website, and depending on your size and reach, you may be able to distribute those books into the trade, into bookstores, your Barnes and Nobles and your independent bookstores and other museums' bookstores. And then, of course, what we all face as we look into putting books together ourselves is that often the first or the primary determinant of what the scope of your book is what budget you have and how much you're able to put into it, and that can often limit what you're able to do. And one thing just for that, for us, we often find is that budget limits the types of catalogs that we can print, and that's we often do need to limit ourselves to exhibition catalogs. There are many other types of books that we'd like to put together, collection titles, other specialized material. I think our conservation department would like to publish a lot more, but just because of the realities of museum budgets and how small they are, it doesn't always get to happen. And so as I started to mention, there are limitations to print that we've been finding have grown more prominent over the last few years. And one of these, of course, is the rising cost of print. Our books have gotten more expensive to make as we've been making them, and I've been doing books for 11 years, and it's becoming a little bit harder to do what used to be easier to do back when I started. And we're also finding that not quite as many people are buying the print books as there used to be. That the market is shrinking for whatever reason. If it's that just specifically the art book market is getting smaller, or the full print market is getting smaller, or it's just the economy. It's hard to say. I see just a little note in the chat there. Love that image. And I just wanted to put something in that would get across the idea of the effort that goes into putting print books together. It looks like this guy's straining very hard to get an image out. Getting back to what these limits are, we find that price ceilings have become a little bit more prominent lately, or we've become more aware of them as our costs are going up, but we're finding that people are not willing to really spend more. And as a museum, we don't really necessarily want to charge them more, but we'd like an exhibition catalog to really cost $50 or $60 and no more than $65. And as it's been going on, it's gotten harder and harder to get everything we want within that limit. And then again, as I said, a set print run means that there's a finite number of books, and when they're gone, because it's often difficult to get the funds together to keep a book in print after the first print run sells out, especially for a museum. And even when you're within the museum, the space that you're able to get in the museum store is often hotly contested. There are a lot of other buckyballs and umbrellas and other nice things that sell very well that are competing for space with your exhibition catalogs. And then just just a screen grab from our museum store website to just bring the point home that, our books sell out, and when they sell out, they're gone, and often it happens sooner than we'd like. Books that really aren't that old. I mean, our Leave Fund catalog is from 2011, and it's gone, and there's really little that we can do about bringing it back. I see a comment from Pamela there about the storage issues, and I was going to mention that here as well. That just as often, your books don't sell out, and then you're sort of stuck with that physical inventory. And if you've got anybody over on the finance side in your museum, they don't like to have that stuff sitting around. There are storage costs. There's the balance sheet issues that come up with having excess inventory sitting around, and that's part of the real quandary here is that each time an exhibition catalog comes out, we need to make the determination of what's the exact right number of books to print, and sometimes we sell out, and sometimes we print too many, and it's very rare that we print just the right number. Just wanted to throw out a rhetorical question, and didn't want to say, is print dead, because that's a bit oversaid, but I thought that maybe the idea of a glacier would be a good metaphor for how museum publishing works. Because print moves slow and museums move slow, so for us, we're moving double slow. But as we see, things have been changing quite fast over the past few years, not only just in print technology, but for museums all across departments. If you're dealing with website growth, social media, video, everything has been changing quite a bit recently, and I'm sure you all, like we here at the Guggenheim, are struggling to keep up. So facing those realities of digital publishing's, the realities of print limitations, we can now turn our eyes to digital publishing, which is really only something that's become viable over the last few years. And what does that offer us that print doesn't? And of course, the biggest advantage is that the cost of production is much lower. Our biggest costs by far is printing costs, and that can eat up a good 80% of the cost of creating a book. So the ease of producing an eBook makes it much more attractive just from the cost perspective. The fact that digital copies are infinite, right? There's no limit to how many of these copies can exist. Which means, of course, that a book never needs to go out of print. They'll always be available. And I think that to us, with our educational mission as a nonprofit museum, that's the most attractive advantage, is that these things stay out in the world. As I said, we can keep a backlist in circulation. One other advantage is that we can reach the audiences that cannot afford print catalogs. Because print catalogs cost what they do, they're out of reach of students, young people, some of the major audiences that we're trying to reach as museums. And then, of course, one of the advantages is that it allows us to experiment with new formats and new types of publications, and other books that we wouldn't be able to try because of the cost associated as printed books. So why is this? Why is now a good time? We started looking at putting together ebooks in 2010, and as I mentioned before, we launched in 2011, and we really found that was around the time that the ebook market really started to make its presence felt. It had been growing for a few years, but it was really becoming a significant part of what print sales were. But up until that point, print, digital books, ebooks had only really been for text only, for fiction and history and other books that were just text. And that was because of the limitations of the e-reader. But once tablets like the iPad came along, that offered the possibility of a nicer presentation, that made the idea of selling illustrated books a little bit more attractive. And at the same time, this was around the period when the settlement of Google Books had reared its head, and it's since gone away a bit again. But at the time, the danger that we had been seeing with Google Books when one of the first settlements had been presented, and I'm not sure if anyone else here had been involved with it or was looking to join or not join the class, but the idea was that the books that Google had scanned would be made commercially available, and you could opt in or opt out. You could get a you could get a part of what they were selling it for, or you could tell them not to sell it at all. But really, for us, the issue was that it would take the digital format of our books out of our control. We wouldn't really be having a say in where it was coming from, what the quality was, or how it was being presented or sold. And that was something that at least made us a little nervous, and we wanted to have at least the opportunity to have a hand in how those digital books got out into the world. And just wanted to throw out some key dates just to give you a sense of how recently this has all entered our radars. It's 9 years ago, right? 2004, the Google Books project was announced, which at the time was really just part of a search project. They were scanning the books so that the information would come up in Google searches, and it wasn't really something where ebooks were a big consideration at the time because it wasn't a serious endeavor, and that's something that really changed between when the Authors Guild filed their suit against Google for the scanning for the copyright violation, and when that settled in 2010, it went from just being searched to something where ebooks were now a real market. And of course, the first real reader, the Sony Reader, released in 2006. The Kindle came out in 2007, and the iPad in 2010. So that's really, you're looking only 5 or 6 years that this has been a real commercial endeavor that has had an audience that was actually reading digital books. And I just wanted to present a screenshot here of what was probably what's the right metaphor for this? This was, the bell going off where Amazon announced that their Kindle eBooks were outselling their print books, and that was just 2 years ago. But that's when it really became clear that this was a serious thing. So the question for us, once we made the decision that this was worth trying, it was how quickly should we get into it, and what are the considerations that we needed to make? And of course, it would go without saying that digital publishing was not in any way going to replace our print program. We were just looking at something to supplement it and to extend our reach, right? There's no way that, as much as we would like digital books to succeed, they're not going to replace our printed books. And of course, one thing that we really need to figure out is what do the readers want from ebooks? Specifically, what do they want from the illustrated ebooks that an exhibition catalog or another museum art book would present? And the difficulty that really separates, the art book from another book, from any printed book, is that I think that that the readers of art books really value that book as an object more than simply as a square piece of information that's just getting text across. It really is something that is valued for its physicality, and that's a bit of a hurdle in terms of what we think what we think we can get, or what we think we can offer with illustrated books, and how to get that to an audience. The other consideration in terms of what readers might want from ebooks is the interactivity and the multimedia that books can offer, the interactivity that a printed book does not. So there are many possibilities that you can get that create additional value for these ebooks. The question for that really becomes, do the audiences really want that? And I think that there's the jury is out as far as that goes. And finally, what would be the right way to price it? And which is its whole other controversy if you've been following Apple, Amazon, and the publishers have been debating how much to charge for these books, and can they charge the same price as the printed edition? Amazon and Apple have tried to have publishers have cheaper books but tied to the cost of the printed book. And if you've tried to sell a book on Apple or Amazon, you've seen that they have those tiered systems that are pegged to the price of the print books. But exhibition catalogs and the types of books that we as museums print tend to be more expensive than their highest price tiers. iTunes doesn't have a tier for the $65 book, and so that gives us a little bit of freedom, a little bit of flexibility, but then it just puts the question back on us, is what do we think is the right value to charge for this material? One other consideration in the waiting and or jumping that was a big factor for us, I didn't put in the slide, is the question of rights. And that is something that you need to consider in terms of the material that you print in books. Do you own this material? Is the copyright still held with the authors? Is the copyright still held with the image holders? Can you reproduce the art? Can you reproduce the text? And that is something that really needs to be kept in mind as well. And I think that I'm going to leave it off there for now and hand it over to Tina, who's going to bring us into some of the specifics of eBook formats and the types of books that we can make. Tina?
Great. Yes. Thank you, Stephen. Personally, I think that glacier image was right on. In my experience, museums and art book publishers have been slow, very slow, to jump into digital publications, but that's understandable with all the rights issues and the loss of design control in many ebook formats. So what I'm going to do is define specific terms and formats related to digital publishing. I have a lot of ground to cover, but I'm going to try to not go through it too quickly. Then we'll do a little bit of Q&A, and then I'm going to show you visual examples of each format and discuss them in a little bit more depth. First, though, I wanted to share what's going on down here this time of year. Fat Tuesday is a week from today, but we celebrate for weeks and weeks beforehand. So happy Mardi Gras. A little bit of my background so you know where I'm coming from. First, I was pleased to see so many people coming from the publications department here because that is where I'm speaking from. You're probably overly familiar with InDesign and Adobe, and I'll be showing you the things that you can do with the tools that you already have. In 1992, I moved to New York with a little PageMaker experience and got a job doing Quark desktop publishing at HarperCollins, and I learned two things right away: that I can pick up technologies rather quickly, and that my desktop skills were in high demand in the book publishing industry. So I was fortunate to start working with the very talented art book designers and editors at Harry Abrams, and that led to print work from the Museum of Modern Art, Metropolitan Museum of Art, and others. And I feel that the eBook revolution we're going through now feels very similar. We have longtime print specialists having to pick up new skills, HTML, CSS, learning the interactive tools in InDesign, and perhaps new software like iBooks Author. So what is an eBook? We'll start at the beginning. It's a contained digital publication. It is obviously not a printed book. It's not a full-fledged website. It can be an app, but it's not, like a game app or a productivity app. Right here we have a list of ebook formats, and we have a poll. We would like to find out if you've already been, there we go. If you've already been creating in these formats, please let us know. It'd be very interesting to hear. And there goes EPUB right away. That's great. So I'll be going over each of these formats one by one. Majority EPUB and PDF. That's great. Oh, and some multi-touch iBook. That's great too. By far the majority is PDF as eBook. Okay. All right, so EPUB, there we go. EPUB stands for Electronic Publication. It's a free and open standard that is sort of overseen by IDPF, International Digital Publishers Forum, and that's their website. You can get the everything you want to know about EPUB on their website. The current iteration is EPUB 3. However, most e-readers cannot display EPUB 3 properly. So for all intents and purposes, we're still creating EPUB 2. An EPUB really is a mini website. It consists of HTML, which is markup, CSS, which is your styling, some specific required files, which I'll go over in the second part of my talk. And it may contain fonts, images, audio, video, and JavaScript. It can be either reflowable or fixed layout, and I'll show you examples of both. You can create it with just a basic free text editor, or you can start in InDesign and export to EPUB, and then hopefully open it up again in the text editor and do some editing to make it better. Let's see. Unfortunately, even though EPUB is the big open standard that is accepted by Apple, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, Sony, the big guy is Amazon, and they have their own proprietary format. The older basic format is called Mobi, and it accepts a very limited amount of HTML and CSS. No font embedding. It's for older Kindles. The newer version is KF8. It accepts more extensive HTML and CSS, but it's still limited. You can embed fonts, and there's a fixed layout option. Now, if you Google Amazon KF8, you'll get to this screen on Amazon that will give you all kinds of information that you may want to know on KF8. There are different ways to create a Mobi. I usually start with an EPUB that I've already created, and then I sort of dumb it down and run it over the free Kindle Previewer, which is provided on Amazon's website. You can do that, or you can send your EPUB directly to Amazon to have them convert it, but when you do that, you lose control. So I don't really recommend doing that. Let's see. Now I'm going to discuss 4 terms that sometimes cause confusion. iBook is a word that Apple has trademarked. So if you use the term iBook in an e-book that you submit to Apple, it's likely to be rejected. I'm speaking from experience here. We had that problem once. So you don't want to use the term iBook. Informally, we say iBook when we are reading an EPUB in iBooks. Now, iBooks is the free e-reading app for your iPhone or your iPad. iBooks Author is software, free software from Apple. It's Mac only, and what you create with the iBooks Author tool is called a multi-touch iBook, and these are sold in the iBook store as well. iBooks Author is based on Apple's Pages software. It comes with pre-designed templates, a clunky interface, but hopefully they're working on that, and widgets to help you create interaction. So as I said, iBooks Author creates multi-touch iBooks. It's a sort of a proprietary form of EPUB. It can be landscape only, portrait only, or both. You can precisely control the layout, embed fonts in the latest version, which is 2.0, but you cannot reuse InDesign layouts. And now just a little warning that in maybe 5 minutes we're going to be doing Q&A. So if you have questions, feel free to submit them now so we can get to them. Okay, a book app. This is an app that's either based on a print book or in the general format of a book. It's obviously not a game like Angry Birds or Scrabble. And it can be highly interactive. The designer can precisely control the layout and embed fonts. It can be created in InDesign using tools like Adobe's Digital Publishing Suite, Aquafatus, Mag+, and you can even do it from Quark with App Studio or Aquafatus. And a big warning here. Apple has this guideline that says that books should go into the iBook store and not in the App Store. However, they apply this guideline inconsistently. There have been book apps that have been accepted into the App Store with very little interactivity, and then there have been other book apps that have been rejected that had a lot more interactivity. So there's some confusion going on. I've written a blog post about this. Oh, and we have another poll. I would love to hear if you have created a book app and if it's been rejected by Apple or if it was approved, if it was originally rejected and you had to make adjustments. Well, I know for a fact that at least one museum app was abandoned, but I guess those people are not here. Well, okay. Great, thank you for that. Oh, I see in the chat, designer had the same issues Tina mentioned. Okay. Yep, George Gross in Dallas, I know, was a DPS book app with very little interactivity that was approved. So I don't really know how that got approved. But I personally don't recommend to my clients that they go with the book app because we can't guarantee that Apple will accept it into the App Store. Okay, so PDF, we know what PDF is, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Portable document format developed by Adobe. It can be static or interactive. It can't be sold through the popular vendors, but it can be viewed on things like an iPad. And we probably all know how to create a PDF. So I really don't need to go into that into too much detail. But if you do have questions about interactive PDFs, feel free to ask. And now we're in Q&A. So I don't know how we want to structure this, but oh, well, I do see, first of all, that Matt is asking about hyphenation options. Author. And the news is not good. You can turn hyphenation on, or you can turn it off, and that's it. So you can't.
I have a couple questions while we'll let some groups think of some things to put up there, too. There was a question before, and this might be for Tina or for Stephen, about how print-on-demand fits in with this equation. So it might actually be a question, maybe you could address how, Stephen, how discussions about print-on-demand fell into your strategy?
Well, we haven't, it's a good question, and while we haven't done any print-on-demand titles ourselves, I do know that a number of other museums have done it in what appeared to be successfully. I recall there was the Walker had done a series of print-on-demand titles a few years ago, and the quality of them seemed really good, and I think that that's something that's becoming an option, particularly for some of the same types of books that make good eBooks that are more text-heavy, less image-reliant, easier to produce. And there is an option for having a book that can be print on demand or ebook, so that if you want that print book out there, but there's not enough of a market to have a large print run, it can still find some presence out there as a printed book.
I see a question for Tina. Could you clarify the difference between an iBook and an EPUB?
Sure. We really shouldn't use the term iBook because an EPUB, this is a little hard to explain. There really isn't any such thing as an iBook. There's a multi-touch iBook, which you create with iBooks Author, and that is not the same thing as a reflowable or a fixed layout EPUB. It's Apple's proprietary format. But as I said earlier, maybe I should go back to the slides real quickly. Yeah. iBooks is the app. iBooks Author is a tool to create multi-touch iBooks. And these are where the layout is fixed. You have a lot of design options. You can create interactivity, have interactivity in there. You can have portrait and landscape. But we really shouldn't be talking about an iBook because there's not really any such thing. I hope that made sense. Did it make sense?
It made sense. I think that for everyone, we have to remember not all of this is logical. It has so much to do with companies and what companies are doing. So I think some of it makes sense, but it doesn't always mean that it's logical, right?
Right.
We also had a question about, so please put up on the question if that wasn't clear. So we have one from Matt here saying, so what do you call something made with iBooks Author?
That is a multi-touch iBook. That's what Apple calls it, so that's what we should call it.
Catchy.
They have a section of the iBook store where you can look at all of their multi-touch iBooks.
We did have a question asking if we're going to talk about the limitations of selling, and I think we're getting that in the next section. So let's see if we've got something.
I would like to answer Michelle's question. She says, would the general term be EPUB? And yes, I would say that the general term would be EPUB. If you look at this image here, which is the bookshelf in the iBooks app, most of these are EPUB. The second one, African Cosmos, that is a multi-touch iBook created with iBooks Author. But on your bookshelf or in the store, they will all look the same from the outside.
Great. I think we'll find two more questions out of here. So
I see another one.
Hmm?
Can I just answer, is a book app a subset of a multi-touch iBook? And it is not. It's a completely different animal. A book app has nothing to do with EPUB or iBooks. It is an app, like you would find in the App Store.
So one you would find in the iBook store, and one you would find in the App Store, and neither you would find on Amazon, right? Or
Right.
am I wrong?
Right.
So if you want to find a book, you have to know the format. Okay, that's a question for you, Tina.
You have to know the format. I don't think you have to.
It depends. If that book exists only in one format, then yeah, you have to know the format. And I think that's, I think Tina and I are going to talk about that, but that's part of the challenge is that so many, there are so many different formats out there.
Right.
I see that Sarah and I were on the same page. She was wondering if discoverability. I think we're going to talk a little bit about discoverability when we get to distribution, right, Stephen?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Yes, there will be some example and case studies. I think we'll move on. Do you think?
Sure.
Sure. I mean, I think
okay. Mm-hmm.
There were a few questions that are, I saw in terms of cost, sales, rights, that I think that are going to be covered here in the second half, so maybe we can address those. as we go through the presentation, and if there's anything that we missed, we'll have another Q&A, and feel free to interrupt as we get to those topics.
Thanks for pointing that out. Yes, we'll be digging deeper into that. And I do think there was one specific question from someone about storage of where people keep these things. In either of your experience, is there a specific way that people are keeping these things, or it's kind of different across the board? The question was, where are people keeping?
The purchasers or us as the publishers? If it's the purchasers, I think that the thing about books, as opposed to just about any other kind of app or even things that you can buy in the iBooks newsstand, is they're pretty small generally. As we get more illustrated, the file sizes are getting larger, but they don't take up too much space. Print is words are not a lot of bytes. So storage, I don't think is too much of an issue yet. In terms of keeping it on your e-reader device or anywhere else. I mean, I know a lot of people read their books on their computers, and so just sort of hard drive storage exists. And now I think if you have an up-to-date reader, I think it's pretty much the default that your material gets backed up to whatever provider's cloud storage service is being offered.
Oh, I see. Paula just clarified the institution. For example, we keep our print versions of catalogs in our library, but is there a way that they keep them as an archive? So that's probably, I guess as we have more, I think institutions will probably deal with internal discoverability as well.
Right, and I know that this is an ongoing issue with public libraries and publishers, that publishers are trying to limit the number of copies that are available for loan of eBooks, and that's still, it's an open question. As far as our museum library, we do have copies of our books available for loan access to people that are using our library, so that we have them archived in that way, as well as we have digitized a number of our books, and we have them available as facsimiles.
And I just wanted to make one last comment, which I think has something to do with what Tina was talking about. Heather brings up, I think, book apps were more popular before Apple created iBooks app. The iBooks author software came about, and Apple's really trying to push books into iBooks rather than apps. And I think this goes back to what you were talking about, Tina, that if it's a book app, it doesn't necessarily mean that they'll let it in the App Store or in iBooks.
Correct. I think what Heather said is exactly right. Apple probably was letting in more book apps before iBooks Author, and now that they have this tool, they want to push us into creating ebooks, enhanced ebooks with their iBooks Author tool, and not make book apps go into the App Store. But the problem is that they are inconsistently applying this rule. There was just one, a cookbook that was let into the App Store last month. So obviously iBooks Author has been around for quite a while. So they're just being inconsistent, and it would be nice to get some clarification from Apple about what they want and don't want.
So they're pulling their weight.
Yes.
Okay, I think we are going to move on. Again, keep asking questions as we go, and I think we're going to dig deep into some, you're going to have to stick with us because you're going to see some techie stuff here, but it'll all come together. Right, Tina?
Yes, I hope so. Real world examples. I'm going to illustrate certain characteristics of each format and then show you some of the inner workings and get into as much detail as we have time for. There's so much ground to cover. But here is an example of a reflowable EPUB. This is to show you what we mean by reflowable. This is in the iBooks app on an iPad. On the left, we have the publisher settings. There's an embedded font. Hyphenation is turned on. Justification is off. And on the right is an example of what a reader can do when they have your EPUB. They can change the font to Palatino. They can turn on justification and turn off hyphenation. So we have all these loose lines. But if that's what the reader wants, that's what the reader can have. So as a reader, I appreciate these options. But as a designer, you know, it makes you a little uncomfortable. If you want to create reflowable ebooks, and you really should, it makes a lot of sense for text-heavy books, you have to let go of some control. So here is something else to keep in mind, color. It's great to use color images and even colored text in your ebooks, but you have to be aware that lots of people are still using older grayscale devices, and your color is going to be lost. So if you want your ebook to look good on the widest range of devices, you have to be aware of this, and the best way is to have a lot of devices to test on before you publish. This is a file listing of an EPUB 2. At the top is the meta-INF folder, and let me see if I can get my little arrow here. Okay, meta-INF folder, and a required file in here is the container.xml. Let me start by saying that when you export to EPUB from InDesign, a lot of these things are created for you automatically. And if you're using the latest version of InDesign, CS6, they will be done properly. So you don't really have to mess with a lot of these things. If you're creating EPUBs from scratch in a text editor, you'll have to create these yourself, but you can reuse them generally from EPUB to EPUB. So the com.apple.ibooks file is only required for fixed layout and embedded fonts. The MIME type file tells the e-reader what type of file this is. It says, hey, this is an EPUB, display it as an EPUB. So it's a really important but small file. The OEBPS folder contains all of your text in HTML files. It contains your fonts and images in, where'd you go? Well, your fonts and images in separate folders. It also contains your CSS file. And then two other important files are the content OPF, that includes your book's metadata, a list of files contained in the EPUB, the spine, which lists the order of the files, and the guide, which describes the function of some of these files. And I know I'm going through a lot of this really quickly, but at the end, I'm going to give you resources of books and websites where you can find all of this information for free on the web, or if you want to buy a book, I have some to recommend. Okay, and the TOC&CX, that is your navigational table of contents, which e-readers require so that the reader can find their way through an ebook. So this file, okay, a question. Was this file created via InDesign or iBooks Author, text editor, or something else? This one was created from InDesign. A text file and images were brought into InDesign. It was exported to EPUB. The EPUB was changed to zip, which allows you to then unzip and see all of these files. And then these files were opened in a text editor and edited to look better, to function better. I hope that answers your question. This is the beginning of an HTML file from a reflowable EPUB. The top few lines are required, but again, if you're exporting from InDesign, this will be done automatically for you. The head contains the name of the HTML file and a link to the CSS. The body contains your marked up text and links to images. And you can see typical HTML here. We've got P with classes and spans, which sort of work like character styles. This will be very familiar to people who've done web development, but maybe not to publications people. Here is the CSS, part of the CSS of a reflowable EPUB. And I just wanted to describe what CSS means. It stands for Cascading Style Sheet. And basically what it means is if you style something one way at the top of your CSS file and then change that styling further down in the file, the cascade goes into effect. So the style that's further down is the one that gets applied. In this example, all of my heads, H1 through H6, have margin top 20 pixels. But, let's see if I can get this arrow again. No, it seems to be gone. But I later said H3 should have margin top 40 pixels. So in my ebook, H3 is going to have margin top of 40 pixels because that overrides the earlier styling. Okay, so now onto Kindle. This is the same bit of text I showed earlier as an EPUB. embedded fonts here, and you can see that everything has reflowed yet again. And this is an example of the same images in color on the Kindle Fire and in grayscale on the Kindle e-ink. Things have reflowed again, not only the text, but the images. Now you can force all images or any images that you want to start at the top of the page in both EPUB and Kindle format. But in this particular book, there were posters and album covers throughout, and it seemed better to just let them flow. This is the file listing from a Mobi. What do I want to say here? You can take an EPUB and dumb it down and drag your file over Kindle Previewer to create a Mobi file. That's what I do. That gives you the most control over how your Mobi file is going to look. Or you can just send your existing EPUB file to Amazon and let them do it. But as I think I said earlier, you lose control. You may not like the way it turns out, so I recommend making some changes. You can see here that the meta-INF folder is gone. The MIME type is gone. Those are unnecessary. We have no fonts folder, but of course all our images are still here. We still have the HTML files, the CSS, the TOC NCX, and the content OPF. And here's some HTML from the Mobi file. It's fairly similar to the EPUB. One thing to note, though, about 10 or 12 lines down is your images, eggs.jpg. Yeah, you need to include width and height information for images, otherwise, especially if they're small, otherwise Amazon will just blow them up and you'll get some jaggies, which are not good. Kindle, Mobi has very strong default settings, so Amazon does not like you to do much to the P tag, which is your main text tag. The only thing I do is to set margin top and bottom to 0, because the default settings are for regular text to have both a first line indent and margin bottom, which is the same as space below. And I personally don't like that, so I get rid of the margin bottom and just go with the paragraph indent. All right, so we're going into fixed layout. A fixed layout EPUB is much like a PDF in that the designer is able to precisely control the position of images and text. The reader cannot change the fonts or the type size. They can't turn on or off hyphenation or justification. So it's great for control over the design, but it's maybe not so great from the reader's point of view. In this case, I would want to zoom in to read the text and scroll around to get to all of it. And in my opinion, this format is best suited for books with very little text. Even with photo books, if you have a full spread image in iBooks, you have this skeuomorphic gutter that, as far as I know, you cannot get rid of. Some people may appreciate that, but I'm not sure the photographer would like that. All right. And here is a partial file listing of a fixed layout EPUB. It's very similar to a regular EPUB, but you must have a separate HTML file for every single page. So you can see here the numbers here are the page numbers. And this is all HTML and CSS from fixed layout. On the left, we have the HTML of a text page. And I don't know if you can see it, but there are little break tags everywhere. And that is telling the software exactly where the line ending should be. So that has to be, the break tag has to be at the end of every line. On the right is the HTML of an image page, which is fairly simple, but we have a div class telling the software exactly where the image should be placed. And then here's your CSS with your div information, precise pixel information about where the image or the text should be placed on the page. Okay, so now we are moving back into WYSIWYG land. This is what iBooks Author 2.0 looks like when you first open it. These are the templates that come with it. On the top, we have landscape with portrait. On the bottom, we have portrait only. But with the landscape with portrait, you have the option to turn off the portrait formatting. So you can have landscape only, portrait only, or landscape and So here's an example of African Cosmos, the multi-touch iBook that has both landscape and portrait. And I like this option because in the landscape version, what you're doing is the designer is in there precisely laying out where the images and the text should be. And so you get complete control over the design. But if the reader wants the text to be larger, they can just switch to the portrait mode, and then the reader has the ability to change the text size. Images are moved over to the left. Now, you don't have to create both the portrait and the horizontal version. I mean, the portrait and the landscape versions. You only lay out the landscape version, and while you're doing that, iBooks author automatically creates the portrait version for you. So you don't have as much control over it, but it's not like you have to create two separate layouts. So this large figure on the left is part of a gallery, which is like a slideshow. You can swipe to see the other images in a gallery. If you tap once, you get a full screen image with a caption and the other thumbnails of the other images in the slideshow. If you tap again, you get a full screen image without the caption. And you can also pinch out to zoom and get a close-up of the image. This is what the page looks like in iBooks Author 2.0. We have thumbnail layouts on the left, the style drawer with paragraph and character styles on the right, and a bunch of tools at the top. A close-up of the tools at the top with the widgets tool selected, showing you all the interactive widgets that come built in. For the reader to just tap and zoom into that specific area. You can also get third-party widgets. So this is not the only, these are not the only interactive things that you can do. You can get third-party widgets. There's a company called Bookry, bookry.com, I believe is their website, and they have a lot of interesting widgets, including analytics, if you want to look into that. This is the widget inspector. Actually, this little inspector palette is for the document, the text, the graphics, basically everything you want to control about your iBooks Author ebook can be done through this little inspector palette. Okay, on to book apps. I hope I'm not going too fast. There's just so much to cover. So I mentioned earlier there are a few systems you can use with InDesign and even Quark to create book apps. But I focus on Adobe's digital publishing system because, one, if you're involved in publishing, you're already familiar with Adobe. It's a long-established company that's not likely to go out of business anytime soon. And the other is that you can create an unlimited number of single edition apps for free if you have a Creative Cloud subscription. And a single edition app is like a single book, as opposed to a multiple edition app, which would be like a magazine subscription. And so this shows you that you can create both a horizontal and a vertical version. For this, you do have to create both of the layouts yourself in InDesign. You have to change the page size and move everything around, resize things to have both landscape and portrait. But it's very convenient for the reader who may have a preferred way of holding their iPad. And this is the movie. If we can get the movie going, this is just to show you another really cool thing, a panorama.
Sure, this is going to take a second. I'm going to turn our audio off and then drag the movie in.
Okay, great.
Okay, our audio is on again.
Okay. I don't know how well you could see that, but that is a panorama of an entire room. This was a gunpowder artist who was able to have his drawings set up around the entire room at MFA Houston. And I think this is a really good interactive tool and very appropriate for this particular app. Let's see. Okay. Am I There we go. Did I miss something? No. Okay. So when you work with DPS, you download two sets of free tools from Adobe. There's the Overlay Creator, which in CS6 is called Folio Overlays, and the Folio Builder. Folio is the term, here's yet another term, is the term that Adobe uses for apps. So the Overlay Creator contains a list of the different types of interactivity that you can add to your InDesign files. It helps to already be familiar with the interactive tools in InDesign because that's what you use to create the interactive elements. And then the Overlay Creator is where you select options for controlling them inside the app. So for example, this is a slideshow, and I have the slideshow options selected over in the Overlay Creator. Auto play, crossfade, hide before playing, that sort of thing. So you would have similar options for video, audio, and whatever else you may be using. This is the Folio Builder. On the first screen of the Folio Builder will be the list of the apps that you've created. And then when you click on an app, you'll see this, which is the list of all the articles or the sections within your app. And this is where you will name the sections and, for the table of contents and that sort of thing. For example, you don't want slides 1, slides 2 in your table of contents. You want to give it an official name so that it will make sense. This is a list of the DPS, some of the DPS competitors. Each one offers different interactive capability and different pricing. I don't know if they still do, but I know that at some point last year, some of them were charging per app download, or you might pay a base price and an extra if the downloads go beyond that. So that's definitely something to keep in mind, especially when it's essentially free through Adobe. Okay, so PDFs, like I said, I'm not going to say too much about it. If you're selling PDFs as eBooks, you probably want to make it as interactive as is appropriate. At the very least, you'll probably want bookmarks. And I see my typo down at the bottom, and I hate typos, so it's driving me crazy. Bookmarks. You can have video, audio, hyperlinks, and all that. So here are a lot of resources. I hope you can get all this down. I already mentioned IDPF for the EPUB specs. If you're creating for these specific vendors, you definitely want to download their formatting guidelines. Apple's is behind a wall. You have to sign up for them to get it. But if you Google Barnes & Noble and Amazon Publishing Guidelines, you can find them easily. Mobile Read is a fantastic forum where it's been around for a long time. Long-time ebook readers and developers ask and answer questions. eBooks, you should know who Liz Castro is. Lynda.com is a great resource, but it's fee-based. They have, all the Adobe instructional videos, but they also have a video on DPS and a video on iBooks Author, which are unfortunately outdated right now, but hopefully they will be updated at some point. eProduction is our hashtag on Twitter where ebook developers chat and exchange information. We have an official eProduction hour every Wednesday at 11. You can find me on Twitter at Tina Hender, or you can email me if you have questions, info@tinahenderson.com. The two books at the top are both by Elizabeth Castro. They're a little bit outdated, as is the Kindle formatting book, which does not cover KF8. It only covers Mobi. But if you're just starting out, they're great resources. The iBooks Author free ebook is also outdated. It only covers 1.0, but again, if you're starting out, it's great. DPS Tips is a free iPad app, and it's updated regularly, so I recommend that. If you want some hands-on information, I recommend these workshops. I usually go to all of them. I missed Digital Book World this year, but I'll be at Tools of Change, which is next week, and PepCon in Austin in April. And if you're going to go, I hope that you'll let me know and say hello. And now I'll turn it back to Liz.
Yeah, I just want to I know we're actually going to move right into Stephen, but I think there are a few questions along the way that we might want to take care of now.
Okay.
I have one that kind of went back. Have you done any translating of things that were already, Tina, have you done anything where it's translated something that's already published into a reflowable. Susan Edwards asked if for traditional textbooks that have pages, how is this translated to ebook version of these textbooks that have reflowable paginations? Do you have anything to say about that?
I have, yes, done numerous reflowable EPUBs from printed books. And it's just something that you have to wrap your head around and realize that you're giving up control of the layout for the convenience of the reader. I'm not sure specifically what the question is.
I think, Susan, do you want to say something in the chat if that's not getting at your question? And I'll ask another question. Matt was asking if you or anyone has good examples of museum book apps that both have horizontal and vertical layouts. Are a lot of people doing this, or?
I would say that no, not a lot of people are doing this. That's why I thought the glacier was a very good image. This one that is shown here is the Odyssey, which I did, but it's not yet available in the App Store because the museum is dragging its feet a little bit. And I think this is a great example, if I say so myself, there was a book to go along with this exhibition, and I worked with Miko McGinty's studio in creating this. And what they did was they took a lot of the visual elements from the print exhibition catalog. They didn't use a lot of text. They took a lot of the images and they added video, as you can see here. The video on the right is the artist at work. And we had the panorama, which worked really well. And for some reason, and we have, slideshows and other interactivity. There's very little text. And yeah, this is both horizontal and vertical version. So I would say I did it, and I thought it worked perfectly. But since we have the problem of Apple rejecting book apps, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this path unless, as in this case, you have a lot of interactivity. I hope that answered the question.
I think so. I think that was a really great example because you also bring up the fact of cross-publishing, print and digital, and how it was made different.
Right.
Okay. I think we caught up on our questions. I hope. Let's see here. We have, if you want to transfer printed publications to an EPUB, do we go back to the image rights holder for additional permissions? Okay. This probably needs the answer of a copyright expert. I think it depends, right? On the book and on what the rights were from the beginning. So that's going to be my answer on that one.
I mean, I've encountered that to a certain extent, and I'll try to talk about it a little bit in the section coming up. But it comes down to what the rights were cleared in the beginning and who's involved. So if you have a more open clearance from the rights holders than just a specific print run, then it can apply, depending on what the wording of the release is. Or else, if not, then you may have to go back and get it cleared again.
Okay, and then on just one quick clarification, Susan did get her clarifying question. If a student is referencing page 300 in the textbook, going back to that turning print into reflowable, how would they reference page 300 in the ebook? Well, if that's in line to text, then that's definitely an issue on the translation.
Right, it's a big problem, and I would just suggest maybe not referencing a page number. But
Yeah, I'm going to add my voice. This is Susan from Learning Times, and I teach online using textbooks that have recently gone digital, and we've discovered this issue. So rather than say page 300, my students have to tell me chapter 6, section whatever, and they've got to drill down that way. It's not proper APA or MLA citation, but at least everyone can find that section, whether they have the print book or the digital version.
Well, and I know that we addressed this when we at the Art Institute when we developed the HTML platform for our online scholarly catalogs, and that's a reflowable HTML app, and we ended up numbering the paragraphs. So going back to, if you think that there are publications like the Bible and everything that have been around for years and cited, that if you number the paragraphs and then trying to establish a new kind of citation that includes the paragraph and links to the paragraph. And I think that the Kindle also has for bookmarking and things like that, kind of at the paragraph level. But if it's in line to text and you're translating something that was in print, then it's definitely tricky as well. Okay, I think we should probably move on to your section, Stephen.
Okay. All right. So let me skip ahead here. Just a couple. So what I'd like to talk about now is basically what our history has been in terms of titles that we've released and how we have distributed them and how they've done. So I'll just start off talking about the different formats that we have published in, the different types of publications that we've put together over the past year and a half, what our different distribution strategies for them have been, how we've gotten them out into the world, and what our results have been. So just starting out, our approach had been, when we launched in fall 2011, we wanted to try to do a number of different formats at once, primarily because we didn't know what was going to work, because it was still something where there wasn't a lot of, there wasn't a lot of museum material out there. There wasn't very much illustrated material out there at all. And one thing that we really did want to try was to do an exhibition catalog as a reflowable EPUB book. We had seen some examples of PDFs distributed of exhibition catalogs, but those we found tend to be hard to read, and the reflowable book, for everything that it takes away in terms of the publisher's control, it is much easier for the reader, and so we wanted to really see if we could make use of that format. We also tried our hand at a fixed layout ebook with a children's book that we happen to have, and I'll get to that in a little bit. And as well, we went back to our backlist and took some of our more popular out-of-print catalog essays and sold them as reflowable EPUBs individually. And all of this at the same time, we had been working with archive.org, the Internet Archive. If you've ever encountered it, as a great site, and they are trying to come up with an alternative, I guess, to Google Books in terms of digitizing as many print books as they can get their hand on. So the exhibition catalog that we released was for our fall 2011 exhibition, Maurizio Catalan All, which is our Rotunda exhibition. And there were a number of factors that made it an attractive book to experiment with. The biggest one being, of course, that there were no real rights issues. Because we were dealing with a monographic artist, we weren't dealing with reproductions of other artworks or other artists' works. We only needed to get the approval from one person who provided it. We did have, Catalan was open to the idea of trying this out, and which gave us the go-ahead. Another thing that made it attractive to us is that the print book design was relatively text-driven. It was a text-heavy book that did not have a significant separate plate section. There wasn't an over-design to it that we would have to worry about how it would translate, and that made it that gave us a little bit of a reassurance, because I think that this is similar to the the question of the page counts. I think that this is the biggest natural fear for us on the print side, is that we release this ebook and then the reader can change it, and the reader can make it ugly and frightening to us. But we thought that at least with this book there wasn't too much that could go wrong. And finally, one thing that we thought was an advantage to the digital format was that it was the designer and the artist together really wanted this book to be almost sort of a reference guide or a Bible. And that was sort of the driving concept behind the design, and that meant that there were a lot of cross-references. And so for us, that gave us the opportunity to embed those references. That one advantage of HTML is the ability to do the cross-links. So while we couldn't have page references, turn to page 300 to read more about this artwork, we could have a direct link. And when you got to the direct link, you could read about the entry and the artwork and then link back to where you left off in the essay. And you could do the same thing with the images if they were somewhere else. So the cross-references, we thought, really added some value to the exhibition catalog. And so here just is a screen grab of how the book looks in the iBooks platform. As you can see, it's a very simple design. We are able to have full-page images with a centered, justified caption following what the print book offered, and then a lot of the text itself flowed. It had the page to itself. We really didn't have to worry too much about it being changed on the user end. And just here, I wanted to bring a quick side-by-side comparison. Tina had done some of these in her presentation as well, but just the differences between what the Kindle offers and what the EPUB offers in a tablet format. And as you can see, the Kindle really looks much less like a book. The iBooks format allows us to maintain a lot more of the design. The Kindle is very much simplified. And originally that gave us didn't endear us to the Kindle format, but it is something that their readers do tend to appreciate. There is an ease to reading that Kindle e-ink platform. One thing that just while I have the screen grab up, if you notice, I have this figure 16 underlined in the Kindle page there, and you can even keep these cross references in the Kindle. Those first format Kindles, you can link back and forth through different parts of the book. So that was the exhibition catalog that we released, and at the same time, we dipped into our backlist to bring back into the public some of our more popular essays. So we had taken this from our more popular catalogs and tried to price them at around what we saw about what a song would cost, something that was a very, very small price point, so that it would be easy for people to make that decision. And partially what helped us drive this decision was the emergence of the Kindle singles model of sales, where publishers were distributing nonfiction essays, short stories, other small books on their own, as opposed to forcing them into a fuller book format, which gave us a greater, gives all publishers a greater freedom to fit the format to the content. It really gives the content the ability to be on its own there. And we've been, as I mentioned, we've been publishing since 1937. So we had a number of essays that we could draw from, but we took our first batches from what we'd been getting as our most frequent reprint requests. And I'm sure a number of you do get permissions requests from time to time. And for us, that was, heartening to know that there's still an educational demand for our material, and that it's continuing even after the books go out of print. And this was an opportunity for us to help try and meet that. And I think that our next step after that, as we had been putting these essays out, was that we did have material that could be compiled into anthologies of topical materials. And for example, we released this year a compilation of essays that we published on Russia and on Russian art. And it allows us to bring together material from different exhibitions in our history that had never really been presented together before, but that we felt really was an area of strength in our museum's history, and was something that we could bring back out into the public. This is the fixed layout book that we attempted, and we published this in 2011. And it was it's a title called "I'd Like the Guggenheim," and it was a very popular gift book in our museum store. It's a very big seller in our museum store, and the book itself is a reprint of a 1970 children's book that had been made independently of the museum. We were not really aware of its existence, and then one of our retail managers found it on a library discard cart, and so we were able to contact the estate of the artist, and we brought it back in print. So it seemed, as children's books were becoming a big, we're a big sub-market in ebooks at the time, that it made sense to try to present this as a fixed layout book. And it's available in the iTunes store as a fixed layout book. I wanted to also talk, at least briefly touch on the iBooks author as Tina had presented it, and we have not, the Guggenheim has not presented or not published an iBooks author title yet. So I brought up here the example of a book that the Museum of Modern Art put out this past summer as an iBooks author exhibition catalog. And as you can see, this is their entry page in iTunes. And as you can see right under the title is the prominent little logo made with iBooks author. I just want to touch briefly, there's a lot of, we've been talking in the chat and in Tina's presentation about the disadvantages of iBooks author, the exclusivity of it in iTunes. But the one advantage of this is that Apple really wants iBooks author to work. And they're going to help promote a book that's on their iTunes as an iBook author book more than they would promote any other book that you happen to upload to their store. I see Ruth just asked me a question about sales. I'm going to talk about sales. I'm most certainly going to talk about sales, and just going to get through some of our distribution elements first. But it's heavily on my mind, as I'm sure it's heavily on yours. So I'll be sure to try to cover that in depth. I just wanted to point out a couple of other things about this catalog. That if you can, it's small type, but if you can read it, if you notice on the left hand, sort of the specs catalog. There's it says this book includes video, and that's one thing that we see here that this ebook is offering that's not available in the print catalog. That there is interactivity being offered here in the iBook that you wouldn't have gotten if you bought the print catalog. And then just one last thing to notice: if you see the price is $29.99, and I I know that the hardcover of this goes for $45, and that just comes back to the questions of pricing and how do we price these books that we're offering that are digital analogs of our print catalogs. So those are the types of titles, and I just want to, before I get into sales, I wanted to talk a little bit about the challenges that we found with distribution. And the first one is that it might feel like there are too many platforms that we have. We've been talking primarily about iTunes and Amazon, but they're not the only ones out there. There are many other smaller players that still distribute our books, and that can feel like an overload. Christoph, I see your question about relating the ebook to the audio guide app, and I'm happy to talk about that, and I'll come back to that. I didn't want to talk too directly about our apps in the ebook presentation because it really is a separate matter. However, it does come into play when we're talking about the sales. So if you hold that thought, I'll be happy to come back to that in a little bit. As far as our experience getting back to distribution, we tried a mix of distributing books ourselves and distributing books through our print distributor. A lot of our backlist essays, the ones that were being sold for only $1.99, we really didn't see any. There wouldn't be no real advantage to have a distributor put that out as a book that's really not going to. We weren't expecting them to sell in too high quantities, and whatever those quantities would be, the sales amounts at $1.99 would not be that high. So it made sense to distribute those ourselves. However, for our Maurizio Catalan exhibition catalog, our Russia Reader, some of our other larger titles, we did go through our traditional print distributor to get those books out there. At the same time, we did offer a number of our titles directly through our website, our museum store site. There are some technical challenges to that in terms of selling books yourselves, and depending on your relationship to your retail departments, you'll find that you do or do not have the same challenges that we did. Our bookstore is supported by Yahoo. It's a Yahoo store site, and they have some pretty strict file size restrictions for their direct downloads. So we were able to offer some of our titles for sale, but for example, our Maurizio Catalan catalog, it was too large of a book for us to sell directly, so we needed to direct people to Amazon and iTunes and other places to get those books there. In terms of the titles that we distributed ourselves, while I said there are many, many platforms out there, we did focus on Amazon and iTunes as our two main points of distribution, because together they do take up, not the entire market, but it's a pretty big portion of it, and the work that goes into getting the books into the smaller markets, we thought as it was more effort than there would probably be a reward for that. However, for the books that we distributed through our distributor, who's iBooks DAP, they already have the account set up with these smaller distributors, so it's easy for them to get those books into those other bookstores, such as Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and other places. Here's just an example of our publication page where we hope that people will go as one of the stops as far as finding the books. That one of the first places they may look is our website. This will direct them to our store, which, as I mentioned, is really it's our storefront that has a Yahoo store operating behind that. And as you can see down there toward the bottom is our one of our eBooks. And I presented this screen grab of our homepage because on the publishing side, maybe you have encountered this as well, but I wanted you to see what some of the challenges in terms of visibility within our own store that we're competing against the felt iPhone case and other other items that tend to do better in the museum retail market, and it's hard for us to even get our own products front and center. Here's just an example of one of our titles that we distributed through Amazon, and what the Amazon homepage looks like. The Amazon page for that book looks like the Kindle edition, and I mean, the first thing that strikes me is it's such a cluttered page that it's really hard to pull out the information. But on the other hand, people have been using Amazon for 13, 14 years now, so we're familiar with that clutter. We can kind of drown it out. And here's an example of one of our books on the Nook page. And here is an example in iTunes. And we found, I'll get more directly, I'll talk a little bit more about sort of what we've seen as the results, but it's a much cleaner format. It's much easier to it's much easier to read this page than it would be on Amazon. There's not a lot going on the sides there, but it's outweighed a bit by the disadvantage of iTunes is it's much harder to find the books. I found that the differences in search capabilities, the difference in terms of the way books are categorized, and the recommendations algorithms, all of that we've found has been much better in Amazon than in iTunes. So the question, do I have to change the web pages to accommodate the eBook? Do we have to configure the page differently? There, in terms of the sort of the front end presentation, and I'm not directly responsible for the way that the website works, so I can only answer this in part. The front end really isn't much different. That we have a template for our products, and we can just put the template for the ebook in, and it looks the same as the template for our printed book or the template for our iPhone case. But on the sort of the purchasing end, from the purchasing end, it's obviously as opposed to an order being sent to be fulfilled, it is an automatic download. But that difference doesn't really come up in the presentation. So I hopefully that answers your question. As far as the technical end of it in the back of it, I don't know how much real difference there is from our other products on the store webpage. Sorry, I see Liz, you had a question. How much internal effort is it to get to all of these distributors? As I'd mentioned, it's a case of again, we are directly distributing some of our titles. We are letting DAP distribute some of our other titles. As far as internal effort goes, iTunes and Amazon we deal with directly for our essay titles and some of our other smaller books. And they're not too difficult at all. But these other distributors, as I mentioned, DAP takes care of them for us. Actually, DAP doesn't take care of them. DAP works with Perseus, the book, the big company, and they take care of the distribution. But I know that, for example, if you wanted to distribute a book on Amazon, you could just sign up and distribute it yourself. And I'll give you a link to that website a little bit later. But it's not quite so easy, say, for Barnes & Noble. I know DAP had said that there was actually quite a long delay and some trouble to get our ebook up on Barnes & Noble. And we found that a little bit surprising, considering if you're following how Barnes & Noble has been doing in terms of the market, they haven't been doing as well as Amazon and iTunes, and whether that's related to the difficulty that they have getting the material up is unclear, but they certainly are not, we have not found that they're making it easy. Okay, so, and I see Susan, the process that we use to develop titles from our backlist materials. In terms of the way that they're proposed and budgeted, it's really, it's because it's happening on such a small scale, in terms of these being, you know, they're primarily straight reprints. And so there are not too many approvals that need to be made because we're reprinting material that we still have at least the rights to reproduce. And so beyond that, it becomes a question of our publishing department working with our curatorial department to basically see what are the titles that we think deserve to be out there again. And in terms of the budgeting, we've been creating these files in-house. So it's once we had the original design template, the cascading style sheet for the books approved, it really is a case of getting our final InDesign file from the printed book, extracting it, exporting it into an EPUB, the process that Tina mentioned, and it's really, you know, the only real cost to it is staff time, which as we've gotten the process down has gotten less, and you know, we have in fact, we do rely a little bit on our interns to help us out with as well, and so you know, that's something where they're able to offer the technical skill. We found that our interns all already know HTML and all of the different technical sides of things, you know, while we help teach them the editorial side. And here's just a screen grab of what our distributor artbook page looks like. And I just, you know, just one thing to point out is that over on the right-hand side, they are sending you to third-party pages to actually purchase the book. And you know, beyond that, it's really not too different from our own homepage on the museum site. The one real value that I see of the artbook digital page is that it does bring together art-related titles, so that you can see in the left-hand column, and it goes down beyond where I cut off. You know, they are grouping the art titles in one place, and as I'll get to in a minute, when we start talking about our sales, that has been the biggest challenge, is in terms of getting people to know that art ebooks exist. So, in any case, that's that's an overview of what our different distribution platforms have been. So, if anybody has any questions, feel free to enter that into the chat. And in the meantime, I will go ahead and start talking a little bit about our sales. So, how did we do? Here is a recent screen grab of our sales from iTunes. And if you can read closely, you can see that in a 2-week period, we sold 1 book. We do usually do better than this, but you know, this is actually something that did happen, and not too long ago. We have been finding that our sales has been, you know, a bit less than expected. By which I mean less than expected. We're having some slow and steady sales, but it really isn't at a point yet where it's, you know, paying for the print catalogs. I think that for Maurizio Catalan All has been out for, you know, almost a year and a half, and It's certainly made back more than the costs of the book, but it's beyond that. It's been very much a trickle of sales. We've done much better with our backlist essays, and the thing that we've found, looking at those essays and at those sales, is that we've been doing well on Amazon, but we have not been doing well on iBooks, and that shouldn't have been as surprising to us as it was. And I think that when we went into this, possibly coming from the standpoint of being in the museum side of things, and working with designers and having an eye onto that presentation, we had an unconscious preference toward these Apple platforms. We thought that as Mobi is a restricted format, it would not be quite so popular, and because we're talking about books that are related to art, that the audience would be more attracted to the nicer presentation that you could find in an iPad. And we have had some iBook sales, but it really has been Amazon that's been carrying it. And what are the reasons for that? It really comes down to Kindle had the early advantage. I think that there's still more Kindle devices out there than there are for other readers. And I think maybe the key difference is that if you own a Kindle, you own that only for reading. If you have an iPad, you can play games, you can do apps, you can do anything. So books are really almost an afterthought in those platforms, even if it looks better. So I see a couple of questions here. How do our stakeholders feel? They're, obviously we're not so thrilled, but it's really something that we don't think, we haven't really lost hope, because we do think that this is really a nascent, a nascent market, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next couple of slides. Let me just, some questions have scrolled beyond here. Regarding the children's book, why wasn't it as successful as we had hoped? We were very surprised by that, particularly because it is a popular print book for us. I have read, since this has been released, and I wasn't able to dig it up for this presentation, but supposedly the sales for all children's books, digital versions, have been much lower than expected, and it, I think, comes down to a lot of just there's an emotional side to reading children's books, and it's something where parents and children, that they feel a connection with the printed page, and it's not there yet with these books. And if you're going to sit and do something on the iPad with your child, there's games, and there's Elmo's Monster Maker, and other things that are competing with the children's book. So we were surprised by that, but but that really just seems to be the way that it's been going. So in terms of our exhibition catalog, why the reasons that we think are behind the low sales, basically, comes down to the visibility of it. There really was not a good way to get this awareness out. People know that there's going to be a book for an exhibition. They'll either buy it in a museum, they'll buy it in the museum gift shop when they're done with when they're done viewing it, or they'll go to their local bookstore and it will be on the shelves. Or if you follow this artist and you're a you're an art buff, you'll know that the book is coming out and you'll go for the book. But it was very difficult to get the idea out that this ebook was there. And partially it's just that people don't know, we didn't see too many other similar titles. We weren't really able to find any other exhibition catalogs that had been published as ebooks. So there wasn't the knowledge that this kind of book existed. People just didn't think to look for an ebook for an exhibition catalog. As I said, the market just isn't adjusted to that idea. One particular difficulty that we had that's a bit unique to this catalog is that at the same time, we also published an app that was a standalone app for the exhibition. And so even if you went to iTunes and you search for this catalog, you would find both the app and the book. And so there might be some confusion at that point of purchase, and considering that the price points for apps are much lower than the price points for books, if you weren't 100% sure what you wanted to buy, you'd probably go with the less expensive option. And this is a relatively minor point, but again, it's Maurizio Catalani's very popular as a contemporary artist, but he's not as well known outside of the contemporary art world, as it were. As much as I don't like using the word art world. Just to sort of bring some data to the points that I was making, if we look at what the market share for ebooks was in this past year, Amazon still comfortably makes up more than half of the ebook market. They're losing a little bit. I think they used to be 60-70% of the market. They're still 55% of the market. So they really still are, they got there first, and people are accustomed to buying ebooks through Amazon. They already have their Kindles. They're going to keep using their Kindles, and as I mentioned before, they're using the Kindles to buy books. The iPad and the iPhone and the iPod Touch is really coming in second place there, which is not bad. It's almost almost a fifth of the market, but coming in second place there. The Nook is doing less, and they're slowly losing their market share. And it may not look like there's a big difference between the Nook sales and the iPad sales, but if you consider that the Nook is still really a reading device, and the iPad and the iPhone do so many other things, it's not a very good position for the Nook to be in. And then there's everybody else. And that's really why when we were distributing our own books, we decided to concentrate primarily on these the two markets, Amazon and iTunes, that were easy to get into, because it really is a diminishing returns. If you're trying to format, if you're trying to go through the effort to get your book on Sony Reader, you're looking for 1% of a market share. For the art, the art book market, which is still rather small. And as far as those devices go, I feel like we are still in a VHS or beta stage here, and that a lot of these devices probably will not be still around in a couple of years. So that said, the same time period, this is the last half or last quarter of 2012, we see that ebooks are now making up about 22% of the market of all book sales. They're catching up with paperbacks. They're doing better than the mass market books are doing. They're doing a lot better than audiobooks are doing, and so it really is. It's here. It's happening. And I think that this is demonstrates how established it is as part of the book market now. So just a couple of what we feel were the lessons that we learned from our experience is that as that last pie chart shows, digital book, they're established, they're here to stay, and they're a major part of our environment now. However, it doesn't seem yet to apply to the illustrated book market. If you try to look up the art books on iTunes, it's really, it's still primarily like how to draw kind of titles, really not the art history, the art history side of things, the museum side of things. It still is something that we've been very slow to get into. But we still do feel that it is something that is only going to move in this one direction. As the iPad, the Kindle Fire, and other more sophisticated tablets become more established, it's going to it's really going to grow. And as more museums get into it, as more illustrated booksellers start publishing these, then eventually the audience is going to realize that this thing exists. And I think that once we hit the critical mass, it's going to improve for everybody. Of course, Amazon is still, by far the dominant seller, and whatever the limitations of its presentation, you really need to be on Amazon if you want to sell your books at all. Marketing of digital books, this is something that is still a challenge, and it's again, if you look up a print book on Amazon, it'll tell you that a Kindle edition is available. Their search engine helps a little bit, but other than that, it's been very difficult to get that out there. And one thing that I haven't said too specifically, but has been our finding, and you may have picked up on, is that we really have not seen too much of an advantage to the books that we were distributing through our book distributor. The sales have not been better than the books that we've been selling on our own. And I think that is probably something that we'll find will be significant moving forward, that the direct sales, as more publishers move into this digital realm, they're not going to be going as well through the third-party distributors as we've been seeing for print books. Just quickly, I see here that there's a question about staffing in terms of who supports our ebook development. We do not have staff dedicated to doing exclusively that. As I mentioned before, it's been our publishing department. I mean, we have our editors and production working on our print books, and it's really something that we're doing as we can find the time for it. We have not been getting much budgeted support behind these projects. A lot of this has been something that we've been able to do only because it's such a shoestring operation. It's material that already exists for us because it's been used in print before, so those costs have already been accounted for, and the conversion is really something that we're able to do, on our own, there's not too much that really needs that kind of budgetary approval for that. We would like to go into some digital-only publications, and we do have some of those in the pipeline, and that is a bit of a different story. We're involving our graphic design department, some of our web designers, and there is obviously more of a budgeted cost associated for that, but it really is something that where the costs are not equivalent to what the print books have been. Finally, this has been an ongoing experiment, both the books that we've sold ourselves as well as the books that we've been selling through ArtBook DAP. What's the right price for these? not really something that I have an answer for. I mean, in terms of our considerations, we do, especially with our backlist, consider this, a mission-driven operation. So we want these books to be affordable. One of our, as I mentioned before, one of the appealing ideas about having an exhibition catalog ebook is that it's something that our younger audience would have the means to buy. If they cannot afford a $65, $60 exhibition catalog, they might be able to afford the $15 ebook, and they'd still, we think that those audiences are more interested in the essays and the content over putting it on a coffee table, and so that would outweigh the lack of a physical object. It's still, we're still waiting for that to really happen, but that's our hope. So I just wanted to close by giving a couple of examples of some titles that I've seen others do. These are not titles that we, the Guggenheim, have been doing. But there are areas that I feel are showing more promise in terms of what we as museums can be focusing on immediately. I think that serial titles where you may be putting out a number of, small, branded titles a year that are inexpensive, they're coming out regularly, they build up a familiarity, they might have 1 or 2 essays each, that sort of thing could generate some a following and some steady interest. I think that we're going to see that as the illustrated books are going to succeed if they're more focused on the educational market and the professional scholar market. I know that with iBooks Author, when Apple first rolled it out, they were very upfront that they're aiming this at the educational market. And if you look at the templates that they offer, and right now, if you do iBooks Author, you have to at least start with one of the templates. You can change it, but you have to start with it. They're just about all textbook formats. And so even if these don't take off as objects, I think we can expect to see, as schools move more into electronic media, the move for textbooks, because of the costs associated with print textbooks, we're going to see that move online. And exhibition catalogs historically have not been adopted as textbooks, but hopefully, if we, cast off the glacier of ourselves, we can, help make this change. And finally, I think that we may see some areas for growth in digital exclusive titles where books are being released on the web only. There's no print alternative available, perhaps print on demand, but these are titles that might not have the market to justify, or might not have the budget support to justify a print edition existing. I'm just going to go quickly. I see that there's a question going on about DRM, digital rights management, and I'll just briefly talk about that. The digital rights management is something that the seller tends to place on the book itself. So and Tina, maybe you'll be able to speak to this as well, but as the producer of the book, we do not have to impose the digital rights management. When we submit it to Apple or we submit it to Amazon, they offer us the choice of putting the digital rights management on it or not. When we first started publishing, we were selecting yes. But as time has gone on, we've been rethinking it. I know that when I went to Book Expo, I think it was last year, a number of the conversations have been about there's a move away from imposing the digital rights management, because we're not going to see, I think, rampant piracy of these materials, as we might be afraid of, and it's it's creating hassles for the readers that we don't necessarily feel are outweighed by the benefits of lost sales. I know that 6 or 7 years ago, iTunes dropped its digital rights management on MP3s. You bought an MP3, you could play it on your iPod, one or two others, and that was it. Now you can freely share that material, but they haven't seen the sales go down. So, I don't see the digital rights management as critical to what we're doing, but it is something that that's still offered and is offered easily. So I just, again, to just bring up a couple of examples of things that I've been seeing lately. As far as a serial title, a web-only title, I know the Cooper Hewitt is one museum that I've seen moving into the digital realm, and this hacking design cult, they've released a design file series, which are essays by design scholars, many affiliated with the museum, that don't have a print counterpart. These are digital-only titles. They're affordably priced. I think they're maybe $4. And these are, like a number of our titles, these are being distributed through a traditional print distributor. These are also distributed through Artbook. MoMA has been last 7 or 8 months, along with their Century of the Child, they've been releasing a number of their books on iTunes, and their one-on-one series is one of them that, like we're talking about some of their greatest hits. So I think that this is something where you could see quite a successful market. These are books that have a print counterpart. These are their these are books that you can go and buy the print edition at a higher cost in their bookstore. But now you can also go on iTunes and download just the digital. And because it's a running series, because it's popular artists, I do think it has some room to have some success. And again, they are small. It's not a lot of commitment to buy it and flip through it. And one thing to note is that as opposed to Cooper Hewitt, as opposed to us for some of our titles, MoMA is selling their ebooks directly. They're not working through print distributors. So the seller for these books is MoMA, and they seem to be having some success with this, at least in terms of their visibility. Okay, and I just wanted to bring out one final one that came out this past summer, which is this Document 100 series. And I thought that this was interesting. It seemed, because of the content, very small books, a branded series, very affordable, that it would make a lot of sense to be, and would be easy for them to distribute as ebooks as well, and they have, and it's been out there, but I think that this is an example of where the marketing really comes in, because these print books, I had seen quite a bit of marketing, quite a bit of publicity for them when they came out for the print books, and that didn't extend into the ebooks. I wasn't aware that the ebooks existed until I stumbled on them by accident, and it really is almost like these were put online as an afterthought. They weren't given their own publicity. I will say that partially this may be, if you look at the sellers, they're sold directly by Hachikans, so you can buy them in New York, but it's being sold from Germany, and they're not customized for the U.S. audience. So that may have some say into why it didn't get more of a push. But that aside, it was really nice to see that they at least made the effort to get this material online. So that's been our perspective, and again, I'll be happy to take questions. But I just wanted to give you a couple of the websites that we've been using for distribution. iTunes Connect is where you go to load books up to the iBook store. You apply for an account, and then they eventually will let you in and up. Kindle Direct Publish is the Amazon publisher, and that's much more straightforward and easier. You basically just sign up and you're there. I just want to throw out this this third-party Ingram, which is one of the major wholesale distributors of books, have been getting into this ebook content distribution as well, setting up storefronts as well as distributing ebooks. I have not used them directly myself, but they're one option if you are interested in trying to get the EPUBs into those other markets, those smaller markets, the Barnes and Nobles and Kobos and Sonys and Googles and other tiny pieces after Amazon and iTunes take their share. And there's my email, and please feel free to reach out with me if you had any questions. I'm happy to answer anything you might have. That's it. Thank you very much.
I wanted to, there are a couple things that came up during this that I just wanted to put out there as overall, because I know that there have been it's been a great discussion in the sidebar, and I think that the formats issue is changing so much, and we can imagine that it's going to be changing again in the next few years, or even different formats of iPads and things like that. And I feel like we'd be remiss not to kind of just mention that I think it's Tina said at one point in the chat that it's really good to start from EPUB and then kind of grow out of that, because EPUB is kind of a standard. And I think whatever way you look at strategizing that, if you expect the books and the content to last forever, that you have to kind of think about now and think about the future. So it's kind of about keeping your information together on the back end, so that if you need to quickly get things in a different format, or over the years get things in another format, that you have them in some kind of translatable format or modular, so that you know where those source videos are, so that you know where that text is. So just a side note to all of this, that we can see that there's so many variables out there and so many companies vying for this, that you want to also just make sure that you know where that where those resources are. Would you guys agree with that?
Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of it comes down to the management of the content and making sure that you're an organized person when you're going through this. I think that one advantage of ebooks over apps is that at least ebooks, I think, at the core share a lot of the advantages of a website as opposed to an app, which is you don't need to necessarily update it, at least yet, every time Apple upgrades its operating system. At the end of the day, the ebook is an HTML file with linked to other things, and HTML stays.
Because HTML is straight text, and that's something that would be easily translatable. So it's definitely good to partner with people in your institution who understand that, that can help you if you're not in a department that knows what HTML is, that makes sure that that information is kept in something that in the future we can, everyone can still get to. Do we have any other questions that we want to hit before we get into trends? I think we've caught up pretty well. So I'm gonna dig into, and this is just going to be some quick hits actually on just a few things. We're going to kind of come out of the nuts and bolts and the things, and just some concepts that I've kind of seen coming up, and something for us to keep our minds on. So I also wanted to say that when we were all putting this together, we know that there are a lot of different options, and there's so much to go off of that we actually stood back at one point and talked about, are we optimistic about the future? And we all are, because even though there's trickiness with the business model and with the different formats, there's such a big possibility and an upside that we don't want to get lost in the details and forget about that. So, so just a couple things that we've seen hitting on the trends area is there's this whole idea of this is some subcompact publishing, and this term was coined by Craig Maud, who's a designer and publisher. And if you're interested in publishing, I highly recommend that you follow his blog. He's always thinking way out there or maybe just a little bit out there, and it's a really great read. And basically, subcompact publishing is a lot about getting back to the basics and really lightweight, less is more, give the reader what they need, and not more, and really kind of getting it down to this minimalist view. And so this is something he went off of the, there's a new publication platform called the Magazine, and that the interaction should be intuitive, effortless, and grounding, and that no one should ever feel lost. So I think we're going to see a round of things that are much more simple, and that will also affect all of the bigger players for sure. On the flip side of that, which is very interesting that we're seeing kind of a dichotomy here, where as we get this epic storytelling that I don't know if everyone saw the, if you haven't seen it, Snowfalls. It was a publication done, an online publication done by the New York Times, and this has multimedia integrated. It's things are revealed as you scroll. And what's interesting as this is a very heavy multimedia rich, so it's the opposite of subcompact publishing. But what it does have that's also the same is that it's really beautiful because its interaction is still intuitive, effortless, and grounding, and that you're getting drawn in. So subcompact publishing should be very easy to publish often, get out serial, smaller things. I think about the essays that Stephen was talking about, whereas epic storytelling, which actually was a term coined by John Lax in an article comparing the two, called Subcompact Publishing and Epic Storytelling, is heavy. This was a collaborative, cross-departmental. I think they said that there were journalists working on it. There were multimedia people working on it. So we also see this direction, which is something that is much more custom and maybe not so much in the middle. And but I think another thing that we're seeing a lot of, especially in our field, is just this rise of digital humanities and how does art history fit in with digital humanities. I saw Sarah and some other people talking about the OSCE toolkit, and I have a picture here of our Art Institute OSCE preview. Back in 2009, the Getty initiated the Online Scholarly Catalog Initiative, and so 9 museums have been working on different platforms that get at what we publish about our collections, but also I'm showing an interactive image here. It's not interactive in the slideshow, but where you're getting at conservation information and layering images and hopefully revealing to a scholar or the reader the back end so that they can really see what's there. So using data and revealing that to them in a way that can also be cited, that kind of thing. In addition, digital humanities has been playing out in many other articles over the year. This is an article by Pamela Fletcher and Helmreich, who looked into mapping data, mapping 19th century London art market, and again, looking at the data and using it as part of the text publication. So this is a crossover we're going to see a lot more of, visualizations, using the visuals, looking at data. And this also was brought up as by Jim Kuno of the Getty in his article that was getting a lot of play about a month ago, how art history is failing at the internet. So I think we're all reinvestigating these things as well. So this is going to be a hot topic and a hot trend to come, and a very exciting one at that. I'm going to give you the link to, I'll give you the links to all these things when I'm at the end there. So the last trend that I'll bring up, which I also think is a really exciting trend, and a lot of these things can be mixed and matched, is what I'll call smart books. I'm sure that someone else has come up with a better name for them. And these are books that, eBooks or the EPUBs that recognize that most of the time they're going to be being read on these mobile devices that have sensors, that are aware of their environment, have connections to the internet. So Greg Albers here, of the founder and head of publisher of Whole Art Books, put together a sample. Greg is an extremely creative colleague who put together the sample that makes use of the geo-positioning within a book. Now, this is something we see in apps and those kinds of things, but this is within a book that one of the layers of navigation would be using the sensor that would be on your iPad or your iPhone. So you can think, as we get more sensors or our mobile devices are more aware, that this is also another layer above just text, multimedia, images, that responsiveness to the environment. And again, this will have to be something that, if it's done well, will have to be intuitive and, done without thinking and that kind of thing. So this can be, Greg has allowed this EPUB to be downloaded. So I encourage you to check it out. Now, if you're not at the IMA Museum, which is where this is located, you can just get a sense for it, but still pretty interesting. So those are kind of the top level things, and I have a poll here, just a final poll, just to see if those of you out there in the list think which trends do you think are going to be relevant for what you're doing. Any or all of them, you can pick as many as you like. Digital humanities is getting a high one, yes. I'm very interested that that epic storytelling is not as high in that subcontext, because I think that multimedia is so part of our core idea. So that's really interesting. Okay. Well, I just wanted to then round it out by, I think both Tina and Stephen gave wonderful presentations and gave a wonderful list of resources. So I'm just going to round it up with one additional resource, the Digital Publishing Blicky, which a group of us have put together. This is meant to be a space because I think at some of the conferences we realized that it's such an interdisciplinary group that is dealing with digital publishing now from different departments, that we don't necessarily have a forum to talk with one another and to get ideas out there. So there are a lot of great posts on the Blicky. In fact, Tina has done a post on the Blicky, and the EPUB that Greg Albers did about that has geolocation. He has a post about that, and you can download it from there. But we also encourage any of you to visit, but also to contribute to it, because we want to hear your stories and have an active environment out there. So definitely would love to hear from you out there. So I think we should have a virtual hand for Tina and Stephen. I think they did a great job with very dense material. I hope everyone really enjoyed that. And why don't we get out a final round of Q&A here with 5 minutes to spare. That's pretty good on the timing front too. So Tina, Stephen, have you seen any questions come up that you'd like to address?
I've been trying to answer in the chat, so I don't know. I don't think I've seen any that I haven't answered yet.
Great.
This is Susan from Learning Times, and I'll add that later we will post the archive recording of this event along with a copy of the slides. So you'll find that back in the same area on the site where you came in this room. You'll later see a watch. Instead of an enter button, you'll see a watch or view button and a download button.
Great. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us and for signing up for MCN Pro on here. And we're really happy to share this information. And feel free to contact any of us with the information that was given. And tally ho. Thank you.